Ohio, a webinar hosted by the Center for Food Innovation in partnership with Lorain County Community College and GLIDE, a comprehensive regional innovation center and business incubator located in Lorain County Community College. My name is Bara Watts. I'm CEO for the Center for Food Innovation. And this webinar is the fifth in our six-part series intent on starting a conversation about what we need to do to grow our Northeast Ohio food economy in a manner that yields abundance, health, prosperity for ourselves and our community. This is a webinar, which means that only the panelists have open mics and video. So I invite you to say hello by introducing yourself in the chat. And then at any time during the program, please feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat link. We will answer questions at the end. So in Northeast Ohio, we are blessed with proximity to freshwater lakes, world-class educational research and educational institutions, an eclectic range of culinary traditions, and a strong entrepreneurial culture. Yet, we are not immune to the global challenges of climate change, loss of forests, soils, and biodiversity, supply chain disruption, and a well-documented rise of nutritional-related chronic illnesses. These are existential threats that we as a society can no longer afford to meet with denial or inaction. It has become clear that our current systems for food provisioning based on the high input fossil fuel intensive technologies of the green revolution need to change. What do we know? We know that nearly a third of the world's total greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to sources within the agriculture sector. Here in the US, we know that 40% of our total food production goes to waste. If food waste were a country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. We see that the soils and aquifers of our country's heartland are being depleted at a disturbing rate, even as our national addiction to meat-heavy diets keeps us locked into a system built on monocultures, chemical inputs, manure lagoons, and animal cruelty. To meet these challenges, we can encourage conscious consumerism, free-range organic meat products, and support for our local farmers markets, CSA farms, and food banks. These steps are important. However, are they enough? To address limits imposed by weather, shelf life, high input costs, and global price competition, the role of technology-based solutions, such as controlled environment agriculture, manufactured foods, precision robotics, and sensors, and closed loop systems to return nutrient waste into value systems, are driving large-scale change needed within this time-critical period. So in the past webinars, we presented research that showed the economic opportunity Northeast Ohio could access in the agriculture and food sector, and how it could actually surpass that of biotech and other focus areas the region currently is focused on. We spoke to large food purchasers, including Jeff Heinens of the Heinens grocery chain, senior executives at Bon Appetit, and the leading food service executive for the Cleveland Clinic, who confirmed the tremendous desire for local food that currently cannot be met. We then met with a panel of farmers, a seasonal field farmer, a beef farmer, and a hydroponic farmer who spelled out the challenges in scaling their businesses in the region to meet this local food demand. And last week, we had Richard Munson, author of Tech to Table, who showcased a range of technologies being developed that have the potential to transform the food ecosystem. We are looking to you you, the people that are on this webinar joining us, and to all of those who are joining us as panelists, speakers, and presenters to help us transform Northeast Ohio into a truly organic and food-focused community where we are able to provide at minimum 25% of our food demand by our local food producers. To do that, we're going to need to think differently. To do that, we're going to need to innovate, and we're going to need to tap into some of the existing innovations that are bubbling up from the startup communities. And very importantly, we're going to need to be able to help fund these startups. Today, we are going to talk about what investors are looking for in this industry set. I have the very great pleasure of speaking with Brandon Day today. He's COO of the Yield Lab Institute, who is here to talk about what his organization is investing in and how he sees the market evolving. The Center for Food Innovation has signed an agreement to partner with the Yield Lab Institute in helping to explore ways to fund our startups in the region. And we look forward to a long and robust relationship funding our startups in the region. But before I launch into a conversation with Brandon, I'd like to level set all of us with a short presentation that lays out some of the market terminology, market size, and current funding examples. So I'm going to now share my screen and walk you through a short presentation. So, investing in food. And when we're talking about investing in food, it is in the growing of food, it is in the development of food, it is the distribution, the processing, and even down into food commercialization and manufacturing. So I want to start with that. So we are partnering with quite a few people in the region. As I mentioned, we are co-hosted with Lorain County Community College and Glide. We also have promotional sponsors, which include the Ohio Farm Bureau, Jumpstart, the Oberlin Business Partnership, the Lorain County Chamber of Commerce, and Burton Bell Carr. I want to thank them very much for their support in bringing this webinar to the larger community. So this whole effort was initiated, the founding of the Center for Food Innovation and all of the subsequent efforts based on a couple of inputs that we and a number of us became aware of. And the first was what was going on in the Netherlands. And this is the Food Valley. Is a organization, a nonprofit that was founded in 2005 with the intent of becoming an innovation bridge that bridged the growers, the purchasers, all the different technology companies, and both public and private funders to explore how they could accelerate the entire food technology sector. And within 15 years, from 2005 to 2020, they became the second largest agricultural exporter in the world, next to the United States. And this was in a combination of both food that was being exported to tangential countries, to the Netherlands, as well as the technologies which are being distributed on a global basis, and technologies in all different areas that support food development, food distribution, and food processing and manufacturing. The second was a report that was produced in Northeast Ohio called the 25% Shift. This was a report that was funded by the Cleveland Foundation, by the Fund for Economic Future, and a number of other leading organizations in Northeast Ohio. And it demonstrated in its research that we currently, through our local farming community, both produce and animal farming, we supply about 5% of the actual demand in the marketplace. But if we could increase our demand, our production to 25% of demand, we could see significant shifts in jobs and in taxes and overall economic opportunity. Now, note that this is not just in the growing of more food, but that if we grow more food, it creates a ripple effect that in fact then continues to grow out jobs in warehousing and processing, distribution. It provides a way to attract food manufacturers and to excite and incent some of our food innovators who are looking to commercialize food products. So the report showed that if we were to increase overall food production, we could see an increase by 4.2 billion in annual regional output and over 126 million in annual state and local taxes on the businesses that would be created and the work that would be created through this initiative. The key to this is bringing in the capability of doing year-round agriculture, both to support that in our farms, our local seasonal farms, but also standalone farms. And then all the technology and technology suppliers, the supply chain and value chain that support that, that is where all of these jobs are able to be developed. So the Center for Food Innovation, we are now a nonprofit that is serving as that innovation bridge. And these are all the players that we are working with in trying to develop an industry cluster around which innovation can be born. Currently, many of these clusters are verticals and are not talking to one another. But by bringing together those that are working on water innovation, with robotics, with our research community, with our manufacturing community, with our farming community, and so forth, our energy community, we can start seeing some really exciting new innovations and start growing the entire industry cluster in a more vigorous and aggressive way. So in mapping out the Northeast Ohio potential ecosystem, you can see that we've got some pretty interesting and exciting opportunities here to be able to grow out a food production and innovation community. We've got a really robust research community within our OSU is the #1 agricultural research center in the country. Their Worcester campus, which is just an hour from the Lorain County Community College. And as well, the folks over at Kent and Akron and Case are leaders in certain areas of energy and robotics and sensors, all of which have really robust applications in this marketplace. We've got some leading manufacturers in Smuckers and some of our pet food brands. We are a significant hub for warehousing and logistics, particularly because of our location with the freeways, with the Great Lakes. We are able to reach over 60% of the population of the United States within an 8-hour drive. So what are we talking about? We're talking about really stepping up our game, really helping those, bringing in companies that want to be located here, that are focused in this area of new technology and innovation, but even more importantly, spurring our research and entrepreneur community to start applying some of the work that they're doing in this sector and driving funding towards this. Next week, we will be having a number of our state and county executives coming to talk about the public funding and support that is going into the sector. And today we are talking more about the private funding. One of the exciting things that we learned about research, the research we did with the Food Valley in the Netherlands, which was that where most agriculture is being funded across in Europe and in the United States is mostly funded from the government funding sources. The Netherlands flipped it, where almost all of it is coming from investor dollars and partnering with government in order to be able to bring this innovation to market. We see this as a really exciting model where we can start really marrying up the investor community with our public funding partners to really supercharge this whole area and not just be supporting a single standalone technology startup, but really building out a marketplace where we see actual commercial businesses blossoming in our market. So just so that you can take a quick look, the food sector, Ohio is a major player in the food and ag. We're one of the top in the country. We both the food R&D, we've got one of the largest statewide employment is in the food sector, and our packaging and co-packers are a very significant piece of our economy. So I want to just also then talk a bit about the definitions. AgTech, some of these are sort of flexible terms, and it depends on who you're talking to, but just for conversation today, these are some of the terms we'd like to use and talk about. AgTech is sort of the umbrella. It's sort of anything having to do with technology that is pertaining to food supply chain distribution. And under that, you'll hear people talking about precision agriculture or farming. This is where you can actually create actual measurements. These are things that technologies that are measuring water and rain and soil and bioelements within the farming process. Smart farming is often a subset of precision. It is where they are using technologies to increase yield and profits, often within the field seasonal farming areas, but can also be used as a term for the indoor farming. But controlled environment agriculture is the umbrella term for indoor. And indoor can be broken down into the vertical farms, which are going to be in buildings without windows, where they're using LED lighting, or they could be greenhouse farms, where you can use the sun as your light source, but it provides a year-round temperature controlled, environment controlled facility. And the other big area that is getting a lot of investment is in the protein and plant-based food innovation area. And many of you are probably aware of products like Beyond Meat and so forth. But I wanted to break that out as a separate area of discussion as well. This diagram, it is an area that breaks down some of the different companies that are in some of these different industry areas. So I want to take you through some markets, some of the different areas we talked about, and showcase a little bit of their market size. So global precision farming has USD is US dollars is $6.9 billion right now, with a CAGR of 12.8% from the 2022 to 2030 marketplace. And a significant part of that is hardware, but certainly the software is a significant part of that as well. It really reflects the whole Internet of Things and how that whole integration of IT within the farming sector, and this is both within controlled environment agriculture and in outdoor seasonal farming. Global smart agriculture, you can see from the icons there, the number of different areas. This here is identified as, in US dollars, $14.4 billion with a CAGR of 10.8%. This is reflected in increased automation of commercial greenhouses and growing implementation of the controlled environment agriculture concept in greenhouses to help develop a greater yield. So in controlled agriculture, controlled environment agriculture, this is identified as currently 74.5 billion in US dollars. And is expected to reach $172 billion by 2027 with a CAGR of 18.7. This is predominantly hydroponic, aeroponic, or aquaponic, and some soil-based hybrid methods are being used for this. And a majority of the foods that are being grown in this way are leafy greens, tomatoes, cannabis, flowers, microgreens, strawberries, herbs, cucumbers, peppers, mushrooms, onions, leeks, hops, figs, sweet corn, eggplant, and fish and insects, carrots, and shrimp. Now, a subset of that is the vertical farms, which are currently listed at $4.3 billion. But they're seeing a huge growth, expected growth at 25.5 CAGR. The vertical farms, we're seeing hydroponic, aquaponic, and also the soil-based, but they has a more limited number of products that are grown in the vertical. More broader spectrum are in the greenhouse area. This then is reflecting the plant-based food market. Bloomberg recently announced that it hit $162 billion in the next decade is its projection. Plant-based food market could make up to 7.7% of the global protein market by 2023, with a value of $162 billion, up from currently $29 billion. This is an interesting diagram that shows I'm not sure if you can see, plant-based, plant-based meat, plant-based dairy, and other plant-based foods. Obviously, we're seeing between meat, milk, and plant-based dairy a really significant growth. It started with the dairy, with all of our soy milks and coconut milks and various other products. But I think we're going to see, as we see here, a real significant growth in the meat area as well. Particularly, we expect, the population in the world is going to be growing exponentially over the next 10 to 20 years. And we're going to need this kind of growth in our protein delivery. So this is just a mix of interesting companies that are showing up in the investor, food, brand, ingredients, consulting, and tech startups. What I want to also showcase here is the number of big legacy brands that are in this space that are going after this, and they are also investors in many ways in this sector. So what are some of the big current investments that have been happening? Well, the world's largest vertical strawberry farm just launched in New Jersey with a $50 million raise. InFarm has gotten a $200 million infusion and is now claiming a $1 billion valuation. They are an outfit that is setting up facilities across Europe and in North America. However, I want you to take a look at this. These are the dots here show where their different facilities are. And in Europe, you can see that there's quite a few. In the United States there are as well, but majority of them are in Canada. They have some that are in Washington State, but there is none in Ohio, which says to me there is an enormous opportunity to hopefully attract them, talk with them, and see if they might have interest in our region as well. Antira Capital closed the second global AgriTech fund at $260 million. And what I loved about this is that it oversubscribed thanks to robust institutional demand. The pandemic and food price inflation has fueled investor interest in accelerated transformation of the food and ag sector, they said. And this US indoor vertical farm, Plenty, gets injected cash and from Walmart, $400 million. Walmart is investing in their development of facilities across the country, and they will be the supplier of the various products they're producing to Walmart. And Equilibrium closed the industry's largest controlled environment ag fund at $1.022 billion. And they estimate that the North American market is going to be needing at least 10 billion in capital over the next 10 years. So funds are coming into the country, are coming into the marketplace. This is an area of a great deal of exuberance. And now that gives us an opportunity for me to introduce our speaker, Brandon. Let me first more formally introduce him. Brandon is COO of the Yield Lab Institute, the nonprofit arm of the Yield Lab, a global federation of funds that invests in AgTech startups and innovations. The Yield Lab Institute is an AgTech think tank focused on supporting advancing global AgTech startups, entrepreneurs, and ecosystems. The Institute's initiatives include open innovation challenges, ecosystem assessments in Latin America and Africa, and technical studies in indoor controlled environment agriculture. Of note, a white paper he co-published with the World Wildlife Federation on indoor soilless agriculture in the St. Louis region. Prior to his current role, Brandon spent the first half of his career in oil and gas services. So we're glad he came over to the light. And he served in a variety of engineering, business development, and sales roles. He also worked as a consultant for a boutique engineering firm providing design, regulatory, and other services for multinational agriculture companies in the Salinas Valley of California. He received his chemical engineering and material science degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MBA from Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you so much for being here. And I am so excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you, Barra, for the very kind introduction and the warm words. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go through a quick deck with you all that gives an overview of the Yield Lab Institute and the Yield Lab Group, and then do a quick summary of AgTech in 2021, which I think will give the audience a better perspective on food and AgTech, where it's been, where it's going, and the trends that we are seeing around the world, and where investors are looking at to provide value and also to acquire value. And so, as you mentioned with the introduction, the Yield Lab Institute is the nonprofit arm of the Yield Lab Group. So we have kind of two arms. We have the venture arm, which are the early stage venture capital funds, with 4 regional offices around the world that I'll highlight. And then we have the nonprofit arm that I sit at the helm at, based in St. Louis. We're a 501c3 registered in Missouri. And part of what we are, and we brand ourselves as a AgTech think and do tank, beyond doing think tank activities that include white papers, technical studies. We like to pride ourselves on doing actual programs and initiatives that support early stage agri-food startups, innovators, and entrepreneurs around the world. Some of the highlights, some of the activities that we do, like I said, include ecosystem assessments. And to give you a few examples of that, we've done this type of work in Latin America, highlighting particular cities and geographies around the world, really kind of doing a mapping in a 50,000 foot view of what's out there globally with respect to AgTech, what type of ecosystems are in place, what kind of infrastructure is there, talent, financing, investment, and where are there opportunities where the global stakeholder community can be more supportive of AgTech innovation. So we've done that type of work initially when we mapped Rosario, Argentina, which, if you're not familiar with, is a really strong agriculture area in Latin America. It's actually a really strong port area, and it shares a lot of similarities with St. Louis, being a hub of shipping, distribution, food and ag, and being centered around a lot of commodity farming and livestock production. So that started as a sister city kind of comparison with the St. Louis ecosystem and Rosario, and trying to develop a methodology and lessons learned. And are there things that St. Louis did well that you could build and template out around the world and build other ag tech ecosystems? So that was our initial white paper that we published in 2018. And then we followed that up, again, doing another type of assessment in Brazil, actually in the Piracicaba region, which is pretty well known in Brazil as a really strong agriculture production area. Again, looking at what's there, what's in place, and are there things that the global community can do to be more supportive of food and ag innovation in those regions. And so to building upon that kind of work, we've also begun to use and deploy this same methodology around the world. I'm currently doing a project right now with the FAO that's mapping West Africa, 3 West African ecosystems, specifically Senegal, Ghana, and Nigeria. It was where I actually spent the month of June traveling through there to visit the stakeholders there as well. But we've done this work with the FAO mapping other ecosystems around the world. It started initially actually mapping 3 East African ecosystems, namely Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. And it's all centered around digital readiness. Digital readiness, are there things that the startup community, policymakers, investors, and others are doing well within each of the country, and what things are there opportunities and gaps that we think that can be more supportive from a policy and from an investment perspective to be more supportive of ag tech innovation. The emphasis here is, we're a nonprofit, we're tethered to a federation of venture capital funds. So we look at this from an investor lens, an investor perspective. We're not policymakers, we're not a policy organization, but we do recognize that there is value when the investors can provide recommendations, provide insights on what things we think are unfortunately hindering or getting in the way of investing in startups and innovators in these different countries, right? And sometimes that's policy, sometimes that's legislation, or sometimes that's just the dynamics of the ecosystem that exists in each of these countries. And we try to highlight that with our methodology and our white paper, and hopefully try to move forward more investment for ag tech in each of these countries. The other key activity that I would highlight too that we do at the Institute that Vera mentioned are open innovation challenges. And the open innovation challenges are a mechanism for us to source innovation and source startups from what we think are really interesting, emerging, or nascent spaces within food and ag. So you can see right there the 4 challenges that we've run specifically around different themes. So we've run challenges around manure management innovations. We've run them around soy innovation challenge, the soy value chain, global aquaculture, and then sustainable ag tech for the Latin America, the Caribbean region. And each of those are thematic. And they're thematic because we build these challenges with public and private sector partners who put forth either sponsorship or money towards prizes or want to engage more with the startup community. I'll give you a great example. The Soy Innovation Challenge that was launched in 2020 with the United Soybean Board, which, if you know, is the large checkoff organization in the US that's supported by a percent of proceeds of every soybean bushel that's sold. They take a portion of that, and that's used towards promoting and enhancing research and activities for US soybean farmers. So for them, this was a great mechanism and a way to engage with startups that are working on what they thought were interesting innovations to help provide more value back to soy farmers outside of the commoditized framework. So that was a really interesting open innovation challenge for us to explore. Just to give you kind of high level overview of what these challenges have been able to do and generate for the Institute and for even the funds from a deal flow, I would say deal flow, but it's not investing per se, is that from the 4 challenges, we've been able to generate around 450 total applicants. The breakdown came to about 65 for the manure challenge, 90 for the soy challenge, about 180 for the aquaculture challenge, and then about 110 for the sustainable ag tech challenge. So that's a lot of deal flow. It's a lot of startups that we've been able to see around the world, specific in those niches, right? And a lot of the solutions fall under those categories, but they also fall under the variety of other verticals that we'll be talking more about that are of interest to investors in ag tech. And so this kind of gives you kind of a breakdown of the different types of innovations, the ones that move forward in our finalist cohort. We typically work with a group of 6 to 8 in each of these challenges. That gives us enough ability to be able to engage with a good diverse group of startups, but also The cohort's not too big that it becomes unmanageable and really we can't provide enough value for each of these startups. Just to give you an idea of the different types of public and private sector partners that we've engaged in these challenges, you can see they run the gamut of a lot of the big multinationals and strategics you're familiar with, Cargill, Syngenta, but then you probably see some names on there that you probably would be surprised to see, at least in food and ag and AWS or IBM or others. They have been taking a keen interest, obviously, in AgTech and wanting to be a service provider, if you will, for a lot of these startups. So for them, this is a great way to get promotional branding and marketing from the exercise of the Open Innovation Challenge, but also it gives them a way to see what's out there, what kind of digital solutions or software or applications are being worked on around the world. And are there things that AWS or IBM provides as a service provider that might be specific to ag? I mean, when I've engaged with them, I learned a lot of different things that I was unaware of that are specific at food and ag solutions. And so for us as a nonprofit and a provider, a service provider, if you will, for these early stage ag tech startups, it also gives us another tool in the toolbox to provide value to these startups, right? The ones that could utilize mentorship or access to subject matter experts at a variety of these different companies. And then you can see, because we're a nonprofit, we're a 501c3, we have the ability to work with the public sector. So we work with, like I said, organizations like the United Soybean Board or the UN Environmental Program. They were the key sponsor and founding partner of the Sustainable AgTech Challenge, or other international organizations like the U.S. Soybean Export Council, which is the export arm of U.S. soy, and they're focused on obviously promoting more U.S. soy being bought and used around the world. So that was of keen interest for them to launch the Global Aquaculture Challenge. If you all are not aware, soy is a commonly used feed for aquaculture. It's pretty. The two predominantly uses for soy are actually non-human use, are animal feed and aqua feed. And second to that, of course, are for human consumption, increasingly because of the demand for alternative and plant-based proteins, which we'll get into here later in this presentation. This is a breakdown of all the different startups that were selected as finalists for the different challenges. You can see it runs a gamut of really some interesting technologies. If you don't, you'll have to take a screenshot of this and look them up all individually, because I could spend the entire hour going through all their different solutions, but they're really interesting and innovative technologies. Some working on more sustainable solutions or carbon markets, like an example of soy metrics, or N2 Applied, which has a nitrogen extraction process that's able to create nitrogen-based fertilizer products without the use of Haber-Bosch. And if you all are familiar, Haber-Bosch is a pretty common process used around the world for fertilizer production. It's very energy intensive, and a lot of folks would say it's a big contributor of GHGs, but N2 Applied is a startup out of Norway that's found a way to circumvent that. So a lot of really interesting technologies that we've been able to work with and have emerged out of these different open innovation challenges. And so that's a little bit of an overview of the Institute and the nonprofit arm. And like I said, we're tethered to a federation of early stage venture capital funds. So this kind of illustrates the Yield Lab group and the different venture funds around the world. So we've been on this journey of investing in early stage ag tech startups. And when I say early stage, it's pre-seed, seed, and Series A. That's typically our sweet spot. We don't invest beyond those stages. There's plenty of other VC firms in ag tech that focus on later stage investment that we work with actually in St. Louis and elsewhere, that we of course invest in those earlier stages, and they hand it over and write the much larger checks when we're looking at M&A or other exit at that stage of the development. But the map kind of highlights kind of where we've been and where we're going. I've been on this journey for about 8 years, since 2014. We started as a small accelerator fund in St. Louis, focused on those early stages, typically writing check sizes of $250,000 to $500,000. We typically either lead rounds, co-lead rounds, it just depends on the different investment, and invest all up and down the food and ag value chain. But for us, we recognize that the venture model, as it's been deployed and traditionally outside of food and ag, had to be modified. And, for us, we recognize that a lot of these solutions are dependent upon harvest season, planting, spraying, among other things. And so we can't expect these startups to come to us or come to St. Louis for an inordinate period in the middle of harvest or the summertime. So we're adaptable enough that our program is virtual, it's remote, it's flexible, to recognizing that we can't take them away from their core business, right? Core business and being available to their farmers or to their end users. So we've been able to build a program that's very flexible like that, and it's allowed us to, I would say, be one of the handful of outfits that are really, really reputable and recognized as early stage investors in ag tech. So in 2014, like I said, we started as a first initial accelerator fund in St. Louis. We shortly thereafter opened our Yield Lab Europe office in Ireland, and actually now we have a presence on continental Europe with offices in the Netherlands, and actually work closely with Wageningen University. I think I caught that in Bara's presentation that was mentioned in one of the studies. So we're there. We have boots there on the ground. And then shortly after our Yield Lab Europe office, we opened Latin America offices in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and now actually opening an office in Mexico. So we will have boots on the ground in South America and then Central America. And then our fourth regional office is Asia Pacific, with our partners in Singapore. So each of those funds operate independently. They have their own LPs, their own investors, principals. Spans a wide diverse of investors, from family offices to strategics, high net worth individuals, or high net worth farmers in the case of Latin America, or other different groups who are interested in wanting to invest and work with a reputable partner like ourselves to identify high growth, high potential, or early stage ag tech startups to invest in. And you probably see the fifth little logo there. We're actually in the middle of raising a Yield Lab Africa fund, and that was part of the reason for my trip to Africa, was to visit the various ecosystems and also talk to potential partners that we're looking at to invest in early stage ag tech on the continent of Africa. And so it's a really exciting time for us. Kind of the breakdown of what you're looking at here also highlights that the Yield Lab lives under under a venture capital firm called Cultivation. If you follow the venture capital world, Cultivation is actually one of I think, if not the most active Midwest venture capital funds and firms based in St. Louis. So we live under them as the food and ag group of funds among the other verticals that they invest in, that you can see there. So they have funds that invest in geospatial startups, technology, healthcare, life sciences, human health, software, consumer tech. So we live as their food and ag offering, if you will, underneath them. And they provide all the legal back office and compliance for us for the funds. So if we go into a little bit of detail on us as our fund and some of the breakdown of the startups that we invest in, you're looking at a handful of examples of startups we invested in our North American portfolio. And so you can see they fall under a variety of different categories. Soil and nutrient management is one vertical of key interest to us. You can see a few of these examples. Some are working on really interesting novel crops like cover cress. That's a great example of a domesticated weed that they've developed into a third cash crop that could be used as a cover crop, and also as a crop that could be harvested for biorenewable fuel and for animal feed in between corn and soy rotation. So it's a really, really interesting technology that we invested in very early on. And they just closed, I believe, a Series A round for a couple million. So they're doing really, really well right now. Biotech's another great example of an early stage startup. They initially started off as a fertilizer focused innovation where they were able to generate hydrogen on site for fertilizer products, and that's still a core part of their business. But now they've actually pivoted that a bit to provide on-site hydrogen for electrification and for other appliance applications. They just signed a really large strategic agreement with Emerson, and they just closed a several hundred actually mega round. So they're hopefully, when we achieve an exit with them, will be one of our shining stars from our portfolio. Getting into some other examples of our portfolio in the North America fund. Again, some other examples, some really interesting technologies. Digested Organics, actually, interestingly, was a startup that we found out of our manure challenge. So they've got a filtration technology that they're able to filter manure water into actually potable or reusable industrial water. And they're a startup that's based out of Michigan. As a result of participating in the manure challenge, they actually received funding from our North America fund. So the Open Innovation Challenges, while they're not structured to be that, but they have served as a deal flow mechanism in a way for our funds to identify early stage investment. another great example out of this list here is Aptimmune at the bottom there, and they're working on technology developed to address the African swine fever, which if you follow the swine and livestock industry, it's a really big problem that's spread to continental Europe, and actually it's gotten as close to us as the Dominican Republic, where a couple of pigs have actually contracted it. It's a really nasty virus, and if it ever got to continental US, it would do drastic harm to our swine industry and pig population. So they're they're the only, I believe they're only startup, the only private entity and startup outside of other government agencies that has access to the actual virus for testing and work. So they're a really fascinating technology that we've invested in and started actually out of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and now they've relocated their operations to St. Louis. Here's another few examples here in the alternative protein space. I know that we highlighted early on. That's another, I would say, key vertical of interest to us. And we look at it from a novel food ingredient, nutrient dense, functional ingredients perspective for alternative proteins. The one out of this list I think that's most interesting is actually New West Genetics, which is the only hemp seed genetic startup out of the US, based in Colorado, of course. And so they're actually working on interesting genetic line of hemp that could be potentially used for animal feed. If you follow or understand the hemp space, hemp has interesting oil and protein properties that make it ideal for animal feed. Although that's a long and unknown path for regulatory approval from the USDA and FDA, but we feel it's a really interesting new application for hemp, aside from all the other news you read about it. So for us, that's why it's of keen interest, and it's our only hemp investment. Otherwise, I would say it's probably wouldn't catch our attention, of course, because it's got a food and ag application. It definitely is the key that catches our interest. And here's a few other examples of some other startups that we've invested in. I want to speed right through this. I know I've got a few other slides. I want to give some time for some questions, but if you look here, this is kind of summarizes a little bit of the disruption vectors and areas that we look at that are of keen interest to our different regional funds. And some of these fall under the different categories that were highlighted earlier, but also I think it also highlights some other areas that we think are of interest for investors for AgTech. Water as an asset. Of course, if you all water is becoming an increasingly scarce commodity, especially on the West Coast, where you're starting to look at shifts in production and perhaps more water intensive crops like almonds or lettuce or cruciferous produce. Others are starting to be looked at shifting into moving that production into the middle of the U.S. or areas where rainfall is not an issue. And so that's of keen interest in investing in technologies that are optimizing use of water irrigation technologies, among other things. We're even looking at the genetics of different crops and being able to modify traits that allow more efficient use of water as a resource. Carbon markets, as you know, and probably follow this space, it's a hot topic, hot commodity. I think we look at it from the perspective of not necessarily investing in technologies that are issuing credits, but the ones that are looking at validating all the practices that go into issuing these carbon market credits. I personally follow that space. It's interesting, but I'm until there's some sort of standardization and understanding of what these practices actually do from a carbon sequestration perspective, it's going to be quite a long time frame for carbon markets to be well understood and for farmers to see the benefits, right? To see those checks coming for carbon markets. Sustainable ag is another one. Digital and innovative enablers. Again, we talk a lot about precision ag and digital ag. There's an increasing amount of solutions that are pushing towards the digitization of food and ag and all the different practices where that are typically done by a human, whether that's harvest or whether that's shipping or distribution. And as labor becomes an increasing issue and finding skilled labor for food and ag, you'll see a lot more emergence of these types of digital solutions. Fintech, I think fintech's a really interesting space, more so from the ag application perspective. You see a lot of big exits for fintech outside of food and ag, but I think there's enormous opportunity for financial products, instruments, crop insurance, among other things, to provide value to farmers. As you all know, farming is a tough way to make a living, and so I think there's a a way for fintech and fintech technologies to de-risk the ability for banks and financial institutions to provide credit, to provide loans, among other things, to farmers or growers or others, that I think needs to be drastically explored. And there's a ton of value there. I think I see a lot of different innovations coming out of the fintech space, actually, from outside of the US that could have applications here in North America. So it's a really, really fascinating, great time. I know we've got a short on time, so I'll try to breeze through this. What I want to highlight here and really emphasize is that COVID slowed down a lot of industries, a lot of sectors, and it did. I would say it slowed down a little bit of investment for food and ag tech, but immediately after that, I mean, you can see the graph illustrates that there's been a record number of record amount of venture dollars and investment in food and ag tech. And I was just looking at PitchBook actually in the first quarter of this year, and that's up quarter to quarter 30% in ag tech venture capital and investment dollars. So that trend is continuing. We have a few theories and hypotheses on why that is, and I think it has to do with food and ag being front and center and the concern for food access and food security around the world. Investing in technologies that are providing solutions to do that. Excuse me. And so just kind of looking at what the breakdown of all those investments and what sectors to keep in mind as you're looking at ag tech, perhaps as a investment opportunity or asset class. And we highlighted a few of those early on, but you can see top of that list is, excuse me, alternative proteins, food tech, food production. And you see also, second that list is supply chain, and then shortly, right behind it is controlled environment agriculture, growing things indoors or in controlled environments, outside of traditional outdoor farming. And then of course, digital ag or digital solutions. But I would say for you all to keep in mind, for us, if you look us up and look our portfolio up, about a quarter to a third of it is actually invested in proteins, real protein technologies. So that includes animal protein, aquaculture. We have, and I have a strong theory that the global protein demand is not going to slow down. And so there's going to be increasing push for being able to provide protein from other sources or a diversity of sources outside of livestock, whether that's aquaculture or on aquaponic systems or among other, or insect protein. There's just a ton of, I think, innovation and value. And while this list represents that, it still doesn't represent an enormity of the deals and the amount of deals. Our governing thesis is there's just a ton of value that's missed right now in the animal and aquaculture sector. So I think that kind of governs our selections, if you will, and if you look at what we are investing in. And so to get through, to dive a little deeper on this, what this slide I would like for y'all to emphasize is that AgTech is still very nascent, and therefore the exit path is not entirely, I would say, clear or linear for an AgTech startup. You had a handful of high-profile exits lately, like Benson Hill or App Harvest and others, but those are very rare. I still say the IPO path for AgTech is not for the faint of heart, and that you'll typically see a lot of exits in ag tech in the M&A space that you probably won't read about in the headlines. That's because they either get acquired at the early stages from a strategic, or they get absorbed with another startup. There's a handful of other startups who've merged and become one because they have complementary solutions. So the M&A path is, I think, still the path to make for ag tech exits, and it's still at the earlier stages and not necessarily the mega fund rounds that you read about in the headlines. And this kind of gives a breakdown of all the different exits by region. And I think the point to take away here on the right there is you can see it's predominantly comes from North America and also from Europe. But you can see, and based on our activities and where our regional funds, we think there's enormous value. And that number, if we look at this in a couple of years, there'll be a lot more exits coming out of Latin America and Africa and Asia as well. And so we think those are really, really strong emerging markets. Eventually, the ag tech exits will probably taper off a bit in North America, and you'll start to see more around the world. Hence why we have boots on the ground to hopefully be a part of that. Again, this kind of just breaks down a little bit more data on the different path for exits for ag tech, IPO, and M&A, on the different transactions. this is, I think, is a really interesting slide. And so I think it kind of highlights that while there was more enormous funds raised and a lot of money, a lot of highlights and a lot of things to talk about in the last year for AgTech and high profile exits, you can see that a majority of them lost market cap value immediately when they became public. Benson Hill's another example of that in St. Louis, Harvest as well. And I don't know whether that has to do with perhaps the public just quite doesn't understand what AgTech is, what these individual startups are doing, or maybe we're not doing a good job of communicating that. And so I don't know. It's an interesting interesting trend to look at. And myself and my colleagues have some theories on that, but it just it shows that the IPO path is still probably not the most attractive for AgTech, and it's still a little bit unknown yet, unless there's providing a hard service or a hard good. And in some cases, some of these startups are not. So that's a bit hard to understand and communicate to the public market. And so if you look here, there's some more data on M&A exits, just to dive into here. Here's another graph I think that's really, really interesting. It kind of highlights the trend that I mentioned earlier, which is that the exit path is truly, in the earlier stage, the 0 to 100 million in funds raised, where we kind of play another early stage VCs, and the exits in the later rounds, the mega rounds, are just far and few between. And so that's where, while you probably see a handful of those exits, like I said, that make the news. The ones, if you follow, or you're really, deeply connected to the space, I think are in the earlier stage rounds, and that's actually why we probably play in the early stage investment space. We think there's just a ton of value there, and a ton of value that perhaps gets captured and unfortunately is understood by a few, and we're one of those outfits. So here's some more data just to kind of break down. And this, I think the other point too here, this highlights is that while there's a record amount of investment in AgTech, a lot of that funding and venture dollars has been concentrated into the hands of a few. You probably have read about a lot of the vertical farms or CEA startups that have got it, and those folks and a few others have, I would say, hoarded a lot of the cash, the venture dollars, and so unfortunately, there doesn't leave a whole lot of investment for the other startups that are perhaps not looking at building large production companies, or perhaps they're doing things more in the IP space or service oriented. So and it has to do with the fact that I think the investors, they want to chase the exciting, the sexy exit, right? And so they all hop on the different rounds. So unfortunately, that kind of lends itself to a concentration of investment and capital going to a few in AgTech. This kind of gives a little bit of a breakdown on just what the average AgTech startup, and it breaks down a lot of the different verticals that I've mentioned that we invested in, from farm robotics, food preservation, supply chain, control environment, biologicals, aquaculture. So it gives you kind of a breakdown of the startups, their median funding, their size, their employees, how big they are, the stage, and we invest in it. We invested, I believe, in almost all of these different type of verticals. So this just kind of gives you kind of a little bit of some takeaways and some things to keep in mind. The trend is still going, that there still will be, and I think when we look back at 2022, it'll be another record year of investment for AgTech. And I think it'll only grow, and it'll only continue as the investor becomes more savvy and understands AgTech a bit better. It's still emerging, it's still nascent, it's still it's hard to explain one startup that may be working on a trait technology for a biological or for a novel crop versus a software marketplace SaaS solution that's sourcing inputs or ingredients for restaurants and things like that. So there's just a wide variety of different technologies, and it just varies from vertical to vertical, from stage to stage. And I think as the investor and folks who are getting more and more interested with outside capital and AgTech understand that, you'll start to see, I think, a bit more patient and a bit more focused investment in AgTech. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to share with you all about food and AgTech. We're really excited about the space. We're one of a handful of outfits that play in the early stage. We think there's a ton of value, and that's what we pride ourselves on, as being strategic, patient, and knowledgeable capital, right? Beyond writing the check. we like to provide that value from a business, from a commercial, from a technical perspective, help these startups scale and grow. And we only invest in startups we think that have high growth potential to scale within their home markets and also global markets. And we have a model, as you saw, to do that, to help them enter other global markets. And so that's who we are at the Yield Lab, and that's what we're focused on. We're excited about trying to promote global ag tech innovation. And we think Ohio, we think the Midwest really is ground zero for a lot of these startups and innovators. Hence why we're in St. Louis, hence why we're there. We think Ohio and other areas in the Midwest are going to be a big role. And as capital becomes less concentrated from the coast and a handful of the few and investing in things that we know, the Midwest knows food and ag. We're excited to see this space blossom. We think there's enormous opportunity here.
Oh, wow. I learned so much today with this. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Brandon. We are at the hour, I'm afraid. So I don't know, we can't really take any questions, but I hope that you put questions in and we'll try and get back to you with written responses to your questions. Let me sort of just wrap this all up. I just want to thank everyone for being here today, and a very, very special thank you, Brandon. Thank you. This has been absolutely awesome, and I learned an enormous amount from you today. This has been fantastic. Obviously, we could go on for another half an hour at least, just with the questions that I have around this. I would love for everybody in the audience, if you can take just 1 second and give us an idea of what kind of challenge Northeast Ohio could do with the Yield Lab Institute that would really benefit the community and find support for innovations that the Yield Lab might be interested in. So please do put your ideas in there. That would be really amazing. So as I want to also let everybody know that we are giving away one of Richard Munson's book, Tech to Table, to those people who are live with us. So one person in our live audience today will be reached out to and will be awarded that book. So please do look at your emails to see if you won the book. All of our previous webinars have been pre-recorded and they've been posted on our website at www.foodinnovationneo.org. Next week, we have Marcy Capter, who is the Ohio State Representative, Tim Derrickson from Jobs Ohio, Director of Food and Agribusiness, Brandon Kern, Senior Director of State National Policy for the Ohio Farm Bureau, and Sherry Caputo, Director of Ohio Controlled Environment Agriculture Center with the Ohio State University. That will be our final webinar, and we will be focused on funding and support available for our community through the state and public funding sources. So please join us for the final presentation and please start thinking about how you'd like to get involved with us. This is a collaborative effort. We are all volunteers in this process right now. We are looking to try and really bring this forward to the community at large. So please do join us. And that is it for us today. Everyone, please have a blessed weekend. Take time to fill your shopping bags with fresh Northeast Ohio food. This is the time to get it. And remember to thank the hardworking farmers and entrepreneurs who bring this bounty to our table. Spread the word, and please join us next week, same time, different Zoom link. Brandon, thank you so much. Bye, everybody.